will I start? Because it was due to start 10 to, so perhaps some of the other people are going to attend the other sessions. So Ritesh and I are going to be taking the library session today. And it's been quite well timed in many ways because most people may have just been to the M&G session, which is been talking about data, change, structures, and quite a lot of those things that are a nice preamble to the conversation here today. So we're going to be talking about libraries, and libraries are pretty much data model that very unique to M7 that we will be covering from many perspectives. So we hope you find it of interest, and feel free to ask any questions as we carry on, so that we can really get into some of the context and stories that might be more relevant to what you're trying to do in your own organizations. These are some of the topics that some of the topics that we're going to be covering. And in terms of the value of the libraries is really what I was saying that M&G had just been talking about. So we all agree on the value of having a program covering GRC. However, we can all agree about the difficulties and how difficult overall across the organization can that. Oh, why is it not working? Interesting. Sorry, I'm talking to myself thinking that you're all seeing what I'm looking at. That's a little better. Okay, thank you. So just quick recap. So that's the content that we're going to be covering. And it's really trying to tackle the topic around libraries from two perspectives, the business perspective as well as the more technical perspective, which is where Ritesh has got a lot of expertise and good narrative and good stories case to this from the work he's done with companies. He'll be able to fill you in on that. I was talking about the value of the libraries, and the value of the libraries, it's really what I was saying that M&G has been doing a really good job in the previous session talking about it. So we all understand the value of GRC programs. We equally understand how difficult getting that program right and pervasive across the organization, how difficult can that be? So I suppose the key answer is really how can we make that program work as best as possible, working with the experience and the knowledge of other companies and players that have been already doing that. And I thought the best way to describe that was really looking at this little picture, which it touches on some of the areas from a business architecture that would be relevant for an organization to consider as they embark or progress on their GRC journey. So from the top, the corporate is really trying to make sure that you've got a good sponsor, trying to make sure that your response is going to be there throughout the duration of your program. It's not something that you get going and then switch off and job is done. So it really needs to be ensuring that it ties into the sponsor as well as it ties into the objectives of the organization, getting an understanding of the objectives of the company and how those tie up into your GRC program is very much a critical consideration. The management, we talked earlier as well on the M&G session about the first line, second line, third line, getting all the lines of defense aligned to your GRC program. Another very critical piece. And the people piece is not as important, perhaps more important, because really getting the people piece quite rightly is going to make sure that the GRC program is going to be sustainable. The organization is really trying to understand that quite often, and more often than not, I'm sure you will agree, silos are very much part and parcel of working in a big company. So breaking through those silos and understanding how the silos align to what you're trying to do is going to be absolutely key. The location aspect, once again, data. We've talked about data earlier, and we're going to get into more of this as part of the library content. The understanding of the technology, the application and integration of those technologies, another critical part. So I thought it was a really good way of trying to reconcile of those key elements that not only you need to think about it as you get to set up your program, but very much as you get to continue driving that program. And that's why it's really a continuation of the process that you start, but not really a very quick finish because you really want to make it sustainable. From the reasons why you would want to get going with this, again, we've talked earlier in the M&G session. I think they've done a very good job preempting what we were going to be talking here today. And the value is going to be, or the reasons why you might want to do it, is really making sure that you've got a common model that allows you to see the variation across the organization, particularly in relation to the risk compliance and the governance overall, how that ties into your stakeholders, how that ties into the value that you're trying to reap from your business objectives perspective, and really trying to make sure that overall you get a single source of truth. It's more often than not an issue, and I can speak from my own personal experience in my past roles, where trying to create a picture that you can take it to the board and make it tied in relation to the accuracy of the data. The breadth of the data is pretty difficult. So trying to orchestrate all of these pieces in a way that it gives you that single source of truth is quite key. And the value of the benefits, once again, this is something that we heard a little earlier, and it's very much something I'm sure you will all recognize, is really making sure that GRC doesn't just become something that you do because somebody in risk or compliance or the board is really keen to get you to do that. It's something that you should really make sure that it ties into what you're trying to do from a business perspective. The value of GRC is not just from because you're doing it, you have to. It's really making sure that it's going to be adding commercial value to your organization. And it will allow you in such a way to improve your performance, optimize the way you do things, reduce costs and efficiencies, get efficiencies, and just really get everyone to understand what the organization is trying to do from the various perspectives across the different 3 lines of defense. How should we consider doing it? We talked earlier about the key components from an architectural, business architecture perspective, but this is really trying to get more into the how do you go about it, not just from getting it going point of view, but then maintaining it going. And as you can see, we've got some thoughts in there for you to consider. Again, I'm sure that many of these you've already got going. And it's really understanding that the GRC program, a successful GRC program, is going to take into account the understanding of the holistic enterprise. Understanding that holistic enterprise per se by itself is not going to really go very far. So making sure that collaboration with all the key stakeholders and ensuring that that collaboration is understood from what you're trying to do and how that relates to what they're trying to do. It's not good telling them what you're trying to do if they cannot understand it from their perspective. So ensuring that the communication is going to really be resonating with those stakeholders is quite key. Ensuring the consistency of the approach we're gonna get into that when we talk more in depth about the libraries, but really getting data that works is really based and very much founded on ensuring that there is consistency. If that consistency is not supported by the models and the taxonomies that you're trying to bring in, it will just not really achieve the goals that we talked a moment ago. A big piece of this as well, and we're going to talk about it several times over, is really making sure that you start simple and build up upon it. Nobody builds Rome in a day, and that equally applies to the GRC program. GRC is something that you start today, but you're going to continue working on it for many years to come, because once you get it to a point where you're happy with it, you will no doubt want to continue improving it. And equally, let's face it, we live in a place where regulations change, business context changes, there are many changes that will continue to occur. So even if you got it to a point where you're happy with it, it will just need to continue changing. So it's something that you start, but take it easy because it's going to be a long way to go. So just keep focused on it, but not really get stressed over trying to get it done overnight. The management of the common information is really ensuring that, of course, in many ways, you would ideally want to have everything looking the same, called the same, tying up the same, but it's not really perhaps realistic. So trying to put that as your main requirement, it's more likely than not going to cost challenges, if not the overall failure of the program. So ensuring that you can understand what can be consistent and what can be different, it's going to be equally paramount. It's really what we refer to as the federation of data. And building on expertise and excellence is really ensuring that you're trying to, that's very much part of your change and culture program, where you understand who are your allies, trying to make sure that you very quickly identify who's going to help you drive this forward, so you can really get them engaging with you and supporting you throughout. And establishing the governance, we talked about the 3 lines of defense, and that's very much equally understanding how those 3 lines of defense fit into what you're trying to do today and how it will continue to fit into what you might want to do in the long run. Libraries is something that Metric Stream feels very strongly about. We have seen the benefits from many angles, and I'm sure that if you've already worked with Metric Stream and M7, you will understand how that fits into your model and your program. But we do consider it to be a big part of what we're trying to do with our customers and driving their success. And on that basis, it's part of our GRC program, We've got a whole module where we go into a lot of depth and understanding how this can be part of how you want to work. I'm going to hand over to Ritesh now so that he can cover some of the details about this case study and some of the other more technical parts of the presentation.
Hi everyone. So this is a customer in the East Coast, Chicago actually, Federal Home Loan Bank. So they implemented multiple apps, and some of what we are going to talk about today is some of the things that they did right. For example, having the right ontology and taxonomy within the risk library, linking the risks to the controls, keeping a consistent framework, starting small, meets minimum, then building on it. So in their case, like it says on the slide, they implemented multiple applications, multiple users. They started with risk assessments, went in with additional KRI, KPIs, metrics, those kind of modules. In addition, issues that Patrick talked about yesterday. So he was originally with FHLB. So audit planning, execution, issues management, issues from those audits, observations, and issues material observations. So in terms of benefits, there was a lot of human time that was saved. Consistency of data, which meant multiple apps can be rolled out in sequence using the same structure and framework. So what they did, for example, with risk assessments, linking the processes, risks, and controls, helped them to do the same thing for audits. So from a technical viewpoint, the importance of libraries and how they tie things together within the entire application, suite of applications, cannot be emphasized enough. So for example, an issues workflow, a workflow which defines who the approvers are. Will it be the first line who is the owner? Will it be the second line? Depending on the application. Having a level of consistency which they achieved. One of the case studies that was done yesterday was about that. And also on the GRC side, really gave them the kind of savings that I talked about here. So yeah, that was one of our case studies. I'll talk about a couple more, not at this level of maturity. Based on my experience in the last couple of years, we've gone through some implementations where different levels of maturity. This was one which was fairly mature. Some of the things that they did right, we talked about it in the M&G case study a few minutes back, have a dedicated workstream lead for data. A person who works with all the second line, first line users to understand, is it really useful the way you're doing things today? Is it giving you the kind of reporting you need? And what else do you need to do to get the kind of reporting you're looking for? That was one of the things, and even FHLB and M&G to an extent have done this, implementing apps in parallel. What I mean by that is not all apps together, but having some level of overlap between one app and the other, which allows for two different teams, for example, op risk and internal audit, to challenge each other on how the taxonomy needs to be, and therefore work together to come to a consensus and therefore define what goes into metric stream. Too often, when we do one app at a time, what I've noticed is team A, which goes first, defines what goes in as the library structure, levels of even as basic as number of levels of the library. For example, the risk library having 4 levels, and then team B, who's let's say op risk coming in later, has to struggle to fit within that structure. So yeah, this was one case study, very successful. There are learnings that I'll talk about as we go through the rest of the session, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, any questions at this stage? No? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Just for me knowing, are you going to be able to send the slides, or should I be frantically taking notes right now?
No, I believe that we will be sending them out.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
Thank you.
Oops. So the next thing that we're going to start covering is about, okay, we're talking about data and we're stressing how important it is. So how can we, in a simple way, start thinking about what data considerations do we need to have? And the well, easiest, simplest way of putting it together, I thought it was really trying to keep it simple by just concentrating it on the two main categories, which is the master data and the transactional data. So master data is really, from a library perspective, is really including these key categories there. So master data in the sense that it doesn't really change frequently. It's what you more often than not would just create it at first and maintain it static throughout, or largely static. And then the transactional data is really what goes on day to day that people will work with, and typically will have some kind of features around date, time, values, and so on. So things that will be changing more frequently. From the master data, what we're really talking there, it's really the considerations about how many libraries you're going to have, how those libraries are going to have the connections, how they're going to connect from an object perspective, what naming conventions from an ontology point of view you're going to be taking into account, and then how those naming conventions are going to be tied into the actual taxonomies and the categorization of those libraries, and the lower level types that you will be creating within them. So from there on, we're going to get into some of the, if you like, lower level examples and how those areas would be then taking into consideration your operational risk and functional categorization. So you've got the understanding of documents and how your documents would be tied in from an attestation perspective, how those would be then tied into the processes and the particular features around the processes that would come into that. And of course, you're going to then, on a lower level, you're going to have the metrics, how the metrics trying to tie into the risk assessments, the control testing, regulatory. So although there are a high-level picture in there, there are a lot of low-level information and low-level types of features that would need to come together to give you this. When you think about what you're trying to achieve at the end of it, you need to make this work right in a way that it will ultimately produce what you want to report, etc. Because if, like anything else, and you will agree, is really what comes into the system that will produce something meaningful out after that. So from a business perspective, you may have a very good view about what you want to get, but really when it comes to the technology and the technical part is really including all of this and then connecting it to the data libraries that we're going to talk in a second. Ritesh, do you want to mention something on this?
Yeah, it's a very busy slide, and it's not as complex as this looks. So why I say that is you'll use most of the libraries that are in there that you see on the top of the slide, but not necessarily all of them. Depending on the use case and the apps that are getting implemented, you will use a few of them. Again, going back to the meets minimum, start small, start with the one where you have a fair level of clarity and predictability. I use that word based on what we have seen with MNG also. So once you get that in, the bottom part of the slide is all about what you're rolling out to the business in sequence. It doesn't have to be all together. And it's accurate in the sense all of it flows into issues and actions. But again, for example, risk events, notifiable events, loss events, whichever you want to call, they can happen much earlier or much later, depending on what you're looking to achieve. So if first line is looking to go into the application first, risk events, policies, those kind of applications need to be, for example, surveys, those kind of applications will perhaps go in first. Op risk, for example, risk assessments, compliance, self-assessment, and second line testing, control testing, those again, depending on what your sequence of applications are, it will drive what application libraries you use. So yeah, I'll just state this. It's a very busy slide. It is talking about what the end state or end goal could look like, but not necessarily we do all of these at the beginning.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. That's a key point, because the other good thing about the platform is that you can start where you want. So if you want to start up, although these are the elements around the operational risk, it doesn't mean that you have to get going all the operational risk components on day one. So you can really start prioritizing what you think is going to be the most critical thing on day one for your organization. Okay, so the next part is around, as Ritesh was saying, starting up is really establishing the minimum first, and we continue to stress this because it's very important as part of the successful factors for getting this right. Getting it right, we heard earlier about doing it right first time, if you like, getting to understand what's going to be critical on day one versus what can come on later on day 2 or day 5. And starting simple will allow you to go quicker into production, if you like, as well as ensuring that it resonates with people, and if so, they're going to then use it. So important part is really getting it simple first and then building on. And the other point here is about there's no one right answer. So of course, there's similarities around how organizations tend to operate, but it doesn't really mean that if your organization cannot really start with 6 applications like we heard MG, it doesn't mean that you cannot start with elements of those and then you can build to the 6 applications in due course. So it's really what suits you best as a company. Guiding principles, we've kind of heard about it before. I kind of put it in a slightly different shape earlier, but still it's just so critical that we continue to emphasize these points, because not only is going to be critical for the library conversation today, it's really very critical for the overall conversation about your GRC program. It's very much a sustainable process. If you don't make it sustainable, it's wasted effort. So better to start simple, building upon it, and just improving it and maintain it as it goes along. Now, this, again, it kind of looks a little complicated, but what we're trying to illustrate here is really how the libraries in practice operate. So from a platform perspective, MetricStream and N7 has got a very powerful capability around the libraries, and the libraries is really what we've got here. So what this then illustrates is the fact that the platform and the application allows you to have a variety of libraries and objects that can be related on a one-to-many relationships. So those one-to-many relationships, as you can see, is very, very flexible, very powerful. It very much allows you to have a number of data levels operating from different perspectives that go across the different applications. So the platform works in a way that you don't have to worry about, I'm going to have one application that doesn't talk to the other. The fact that you've got platforms supporting all of the applications, it means that all your data libraries can come into contact and interact in a way that it allows your organization to see the interconnectedness across the various angles that you're trying to manage your GRC. And as I commented earlier, and Ritesh mentioned the same thing, because this is a progressive process, you don't have to, and I stress that point, you really don't have to start with all your libraries on day 1. You can start with the basic libraries, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But you can start with the basic libraries and just continue to evolve it as you progress. Any points you want to add to that?
Yeah, again, I echo what Victoria said. This is more technology and what it can achieve. Do you really need to link each library? There are 19 library elements in MetricStream. Do you really need to link, or do you have use cases to link each one to the other? Not really. It's possible in the tool, but do you really need to do it? For most of the applications that we roll out, I would say the key are not more than 10. If there are 6 apps that we are rolling out for a customer, multiple first line, second line, and third line, personally, I have not seen more than 10 libraries being used, or at least consistently being used. Let me put it that way. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start getting into some of the examples, and really drill into the use cases. For the operational use case, those are the minimum libraries that we would suggest that any organization wanting to implement this platform and these applications would need to consider. Of course, each of those could break into lower levels. So if you're talking about the processes, you're going to have a process level 1, level 2, level 3. It would depend on what company it is, but the flexibility is there. You can start with the 4 libraries for that application, that use case, and really start drilling further as you feel is going to suit you and add value to your company. And equally for the compliance, you can see how all the various elements connect. You've got the ones that are going to be more critical and the ones that are going to be supporting, which we're going to see in another example in a moment, but you can see the power of it because they all interact on a one-to-many relationship. Ritesh? Okay, so this is an example for a program trying to implement operational risk, internal audit, SOX, IT risk, and BCM. And as Ritesh said, that you can have up to 19 libraries, and how those 19 libraries would then allow you and deliver value across the 5 applications that the example is focusing on. So you can see that as you're building and focusing on one library, that one library will actually, if you get it right on day one, that one single library for this application will start delivering value across other areas. And the ones that the reason for the different names is whether it's required, and the other one is going to be supportive of the as an optional. It's not necessarily required on day one, so it gives you that the naming for R or the O. So you can see how correlation occurs across the different applications in a way that you would then see the interconnectedness I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah, so I'll just, even this slide for me is looking at the most pessimistic side of things. I'll take an example. Financial accounts. OpRisk, it's listed as required. Have I seen financial accounts being linked to a loss event in the last 5 years? I've really not. It is required if you'd like to do it, if you'd like to say the loss event was with a direct loss to a particular income loss account and the loss amount was this. If you want to log that level of detail, would you do it in a GRC tool? Would you then maintain the income and balance sheet statements within this tool and therefore have your financial accounts here? So even though it says required here, have I seen that in the last 4 years? Really not. So like I said, 10 maximum. Yeah.
Any questions so far? No? Yeah?
Yep.
I think you're sure.
From an implementation perspective, say we're going through an upgrade from the previous version, is this something that MetricStream then comes with your team coming to, say, our bank and goes, if you're implementing it, this is what we recommend
Absolutely.
as part of the delivery?
Mm-hmm. So there is the ramp and the leading with library sessions. You can maybe talk about that.
Yeah, so we have got, I mentioned earlier on that our libraries is part of the GRC program, and the GRC program is what we work with organizations to drive the success of the program. So we would for sure come and not only cover it as a concept with you and your stakeholders, but we would also work with you to understand what libraries would suit your use case and how you would evolve from where you're at today in your current version to the M7 way of working within the library structure.
And I'll just add to that, too often personally also, as technology people, we've glossed over this. We've not talked enough to our customers about this and the capabilities and the powerful capabilities this has. How libraries link to each other, what do they mean in reporting, how do they mean for roll-up, what do they mean for roll-up, and things like that. So at least personally, as a learning, I feel we need to keep and consistently keep talking about it through the implementation, BAU, any engagement channel we have with our customers, we need to be talking about it because typically what happens, and I'll talk about myself, we talk about the library, we talk about the approval workflow, we talk about an upload template, and we walk away. We are not talking about what best practices are unless the leading with library session happens. And too often, again the session happens very early in the program. Perhaps it needs to happen many more times because the aha moment for a customer is in the middle stages. It doesn't happen that early. And most of the time I feel they just hear and then it doesn't just, they can't assimilate it. It's too early for them to assimilate that. So internally, we're working out how to, as a process, do this multiple times through the customer journey because any number of times we repeat this, the value is just incremental. So yeah, we'll just build on that.
Yeah, that really resonates with some of the stuff we're doing. What I want to get to, so I've seen the deck that comes from, the Leading with Libraries stuff, and there's a really good slide in it which talks about the federated versus the centralized and how deep do you go and all that sort of stuff. What I'm interested to know is, I know there's recommendations on there, but really understanding the pros and cons of having, because different organizations will have either a real vertical structure and they'll want to go down to 6 levels, versus others that will have a very flat horizontal taxonomies, and they are just going to want 2 at max. And there must be benefits and pros and cons to each approach, and I just want to understand them a bit better.
Yeah, so again, I'll have to do some deep dive into the data personally if I'm looking at it. What I suggest when I see that customers are grappling with this is buffer it. What I mean by that, and that's simple English, but what I'm trying to basically say is go with 4 levels. That's our recommendation. Stick with that. If you don't know what your level 1 and level 2, or maybe you know your level 1 but you don't know your level 2 and level 3, put placeholders in. What you don't want to be in is a situation where you went with 2, did your risk assessment at 2 levels, and then the roll up and the kind of reporting you're looking for is just not making sense. It's not giving you that value. I've seen customers, multiple teams, like one team going with 3 levels, another team going with 4 levels and so on, and I always say buffer it with 1 additional level in between. So one team just buffers that. So they call the same level 4 as the level 3 risk and stick with level 4 levels of the risk taxonomy, for example. And then when they do some level of reporting and so on, and they realize there are benefits, etc., and they can extend that a little more, then they actually place a level 3 risk there. So again, lesser number of levels, advantages in terms of data maintenance, obvious ones, right? But how long are you looking at as in this program? What's the kind of reporting you're looking at right now versus where do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve from this application? 4 levels, my recommendation, but why? Like I said, buffer it, have some placeholders, work with it, and then see where you go.
I think it's also understanding what you're trying to do, because if what you're trying to do is often replicate what you've got today on an electronic format, chances are, more often than not, you're not going to really get the most effective way out of the tool. But if you really start questioning before you build the libraries, you start understanding what it is that we've got today, why does it work the way it does today. I'm going back to the first slide about understanding your business architecture in a way that you can justify what you've got versus what you might want to keep. And that would then tie you into what Ritesh is saying, a clearer and more accurate understanding of whether the number of libraries is going to require 3, 4, whatever would be suitable, but suitable and effective as well to achieve your end game. Yeah,
I'll just add to that. So too often I've seen customers coming first with 3 levels. Again, they've had a very initial understanding of this slide pack. They go with 3 levels based on consensus within the teams. Then they try to fit in a 4th level in between. Technologically, it is possible, but it requires a serious amount of data massaging, especially if there is transactional data already in the application. You are trying to bring a level in between, what it means to reporting, what it means to analytics, what it means to even transactional data that is in progress, right? There's an assessment done. The tool doesn't do it automatically, so you have to do an assessment with the services team or support team, whichever. So, like I said, it is possible technically, but do you want to even be there? So, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
That's the question we asked. So when you've got one group saying we need to go down 8 levels in the organisational structure, it's why? What are you going to get out of that? Well, we do it today. It was not a good enough answer, right? So, yeah, you make a good point. It's why. You'll be amazed the answers you get.
Okay, so this is a different view of the operational risk and how that modeling around the recommended and the optional comes into play, and what different elements would come into the connections, whether they would be going from the, as we can see on the middle, the primary, and how those will be supportive in relation to some of the other elements. Again, it looks kind of scary perhaps, but it's, as Ritesh kept saying, and I also stressed at the beginning, it's about starting with the simple and building upon it. There's really no benefit to it. There is no benefit to anyone else involved around trying to match too soon, because chances are you will have to remodel it and rehash it, which is just wasted effort. Yeah? You want to say anything? No. No? Slightly different view in a similar fashion for the internal audit application. So once again, it's just bringing all the connectivity around the different libraries so that you can get different value out of the connections that can be established. A similar model for compliance. And the idea of putting this together is really twofold, really. One, to trying to demonstrate the flexibility and the power behind the tool, but also just to give the view as to what we would recommend that you could consider. It doesn't really mean that that's how you need to end up, but it's really how you might want to frame up the approach and then build upon it. And we're going to get into some kind of high-level features around how would you consider defining the libraries and the hierarchies around it. It's a conversation that would take hours, so we're not going to go into a lot of detail, but just to kind of give you a little bit of a taste for what it would look like. So as we said earlier, starting with the federated approach and the centralized. Federation versus centralization. As we said equally earlier, no one right answer. Different organizations might benefit from one or the other, but I suppose centralization is perhaps a utopic view for sure on day one. So if it's no point in going from utopic on day one, what's the best next option? And the best next option is about federalization, or the federation rather. Federation is very much around understanding what's critical to be unique to all and what is okay to keep it variable. So what must be unique and consistent across all the various parts of the organization, and what can then be allowed to be different for each of the business units. It kind of gives a bit of a best of both cases, and that way it means that you don't have to wait for everything to be perfect to achieve the centralized view in a way that you can, continue to improve and progress. So I think it's quite a good approach in my own personal experience. I think federation is for sure more realistic. It really ties into how organizations work today, the complexities that organizations have in relation to the matrix groupings and how different business units come into it. Yeah. And from here on, we are going to continue to drill a bit more about how decentralization versus localization will come into it when you come to think about different levels. So what we've got here is just an example for a risk level, whether you might consider it to be working, joining the two pieces around the centralization and the localization, so you can have still meeting all requirements from all business perspectives, but it's still allowing you to get at the top level, levels 1 to 3, in a way that you're going to have the consistency required to give you that single story, single view of the truth that we talked at the beginning. I'm not going to go into anything more detail unless you've got any specific questions on that. Definitely a more in-depth conversation for another time, but we just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor for it. A similar kind of view about how you might want to tie up the risks to the controls and the power behind the tool. So you can connect different pieces, whether these are level 1, level 2, level 3, across to all the libraries. So it just really becomes really powerful. You can connect it all in a way that not only makes sense from a data point of view, but it also makes even more sense when you come to report it out, and whether you report it out through the ongoing tools in the system, or whether you use any other analytical tools.
So just to illustrate what Victoria mentioned, sometimes I've encountered customers where they're really not sure, should we go with level 5, level 4, localize, centralize, and so on. And my question to them then is, what kind of reporting is your C-level looking at? What kind of reporting are your second line leads looking at? So if, for example, level 3 is what second line leads are looking at, that will be my level 3. So If that's the reporting that they're looking for, a risk register which shows me how risks have trended in the last 6 months. So if I'm able to understand, that becomes my level 3, and that becomes consistently for all the second line managers the level 3. How they fit it in is another problem, not denying that. But what I'm trying to say is the level 1 and 2 is something typically I don't face a challenge with. It's level 3 and level 4 and inconsistencies between one second line organization and another second line organization. That is what we end up facing. And what levels they link to in the control. So should it be as specific as a particular second line organization needs or a first line organization needs versus another one? For example, some controls around segregation of duties. Some of the controls, when we look at the data, it's the same control but worded differently to suit the requirements of a particular organization. So again, some of the rationalization or some of the flagging we can do as a vendor, but and as consultants, I'll be honest, but much of it needs discussion, needs elaboration with the customers, and some of the discussions we have access to, some of these discussions we don't. But yeah, so what I'm trying to emphasize is these are broad rules. Again, level 4, level 3, it's a decision that I think meets minimum, but also future proofing in some ways.
Yeah. Another example, and again, we're gonna not really go too much detail, but it's really trying to bring them together so that you can understand that once you've got your risk understanding, the risk understanding can then tie up into the controls as we just mentioned, but then it allows you to bring a new layer, which is the processes. So you can continue to build up, and this is the big point that we're trying to emphasize out of all of this, that is very much a foundational, ongoing process that you can build upon and develop it further as your information allows and your maturity equally allows.
Sorry, can I just ask on that slide?
Yeah?
See how that suggests me there's a level 4 risk with new account open fraud?
Yep.
But if that blue line went from internal fraud to the process open new customer account, is that not defining the same thing? So is that level 4 risk not superfluous?
Okay, let me understand the question a little. So you're saying internal fraud to open new customer account, how is it different from a level 4 risk linking to the same?
Yeah, so the level 4 risk is describing fraud risk in the process of opening a new account. That's how I read that. And so to me, I can define that same box by linking the level 3 risk directly to the process it's talking about, if you see what I mean. So that to me looks to be an additional piece of level 4 I didn't need, because I can define what I want to I want to describe that risk in that process, and the relationship does that for me as opposed to having a box. Probably, maybe not. So if that's the reason, I'm fine. I'm just trying to go, do I stop eliminating that sort of stuff when I'm setting things up,
So I'll add, so what's a current reporting looking like? Is it looking to report on a level 4, or is it,
Yeah, so if that's fine, that's my answer. If the reporting we're trying to meet needs that box, go with it. That's fine, thank you.
Maybe just to add, so we have that exact taxonomy. So for example, if you take that level 2 fraud risk, internal fraud, I guess one I can use is data. Our data risk so operational risk, information risk, data, given that department, they'll articulate how we articulate our level 3 different to that department. So we give the local functions the option to have variants of their level 3 risks. Really, that is a variant of a level 3 risk, but we just call it level 4 because that person wants to start talking of how internal fraud happens in commercial. That one is talking about it in business finance. They've got their different quirks. So you then give them the option ultimately the control might be the same process linked to the same control, but because it's now becomes more relevant if you give them the option of the next level down to articulate the same risk in a different way that's relevant to them. So we then give them we call it level 4, but it's really a level 3, and we report it, we risk assess it at a level 3 as well.
Yeah. Good points. I think we need to meet more often as a group rather than one-on-one. Yeah.
I think we're kind of coming to the end of the session, so we could continue to go through it, but I want to be mindful of the fact that if you've got any other questions, I'd rather answer your questions as opposed to continuing to carry on.
I'm more interested in the control taxonomy. We're very comfortable with the risk side of it, but I think even the organization I was with before and my current one, we don't have a good understanding of a control library as far as levels.
Okay.
The slide you had before, that one, started telling me that, okay, maybe if I did have levels, I would then say my level 2 control meets my level 3 risk, and I should look at it that way. And I've never thought of that way. Does the implementation of this come with a suggested approach and how we can do our control libraries?
Suggested approach based on what technology can do, but again, flexibility available. So what I mean by that, how does your control testing, breaking it down into the technical piece, the control testing allows me to see these are the controls linked to that risk when I'm doing a control testing, a test execution. I can do the same in a risk assessment when I have an inherent risk rating, then I have a control testing input from second line, and then a residual risk rating. If this mapping helps you achieve that, then definitely go for it. What I mean by that is, you asked me, is there any value in adding it at the level 2?
No, I see the value.
Right.
But more, is there a suggested control taxonomy or library? We do have millions of controls.
Right.
But we've never put structure around it so that we know we can categorize it to be level 1 is this, level 2 is this, and therefore all of my level 2 are going to meet my level 3 risks.
Unlike risks, controls really don't roll up data or show you information based on levels. What I mean by that is, metric stream really doesn't care if you have just 1 level or 4 levels, controls specifically. If you have 4 levels, then in risk it makes a difference, roll up wise, access control wise, and so on. But controls, even if you have 1 level or 4 levels, the only impact is access. That's pretty much it. So from a suggestion point of view, I think we have some broad suggestions or what should level 1 be, what should level 2 be, for example, categories and local controls and so on. But I don't think we have a suggestion on the controls front. We do that more often on organization levels, risks, processes, not as much controls. But yeah, the slide deck will give you that detail.
From the control area, I don't know if you're familiar with the UCF controls. UCF, the Unified Control Framework. Okay. We're working with some of the teams here on implementing some of those, so maybe we can discuss it with you in your case, specific case. Because you're right, we would not, well, you can do whatever you like, as Ritesh says, from a technology perspective, is totally allowed and available to do, but we would be able to work with you to try to either improve it or recommend ways that you could look at it in a way that is more harmonized, and the UCF would allow you to do that. Yeah.
I think we're over time.
Yeah, we're kind of running out of time. So do you have any other questions?
Yeah, this is a huge slide pack. This is a huge slide pack of easily 50 plus slides. So yeah, we'll look to share it with all of you and see how we can do that. But yeah, it's a workshop in itself. The leading with libraries, the whole GRC program piece in itself, a workshop which we conduct for customers. So yeah, definitely not possible in 50 minutes, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just really trying to be a taster for what it can do. If you want to hold any more detailed discussions about your own organization, we could, as I said at the beginning, I don't know, maybe I should go back to that slide. There is a whole program around customer success where libraries is one piece of it. So happy to talk to you more. Just let us know, and we'll work with you to improve what you're trying to do. Thank you, everyone, for their participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.